So you probably heard Catherine talk for a moment about SARE and how you all can earn some money by helping us collect data for SARE. But that's only one of the, sorry, get this a little closer. Maybe I'll just hold it. That's only one of the benefits of SARE. SARE is giving us a lot of really cool data. And data that we can use to tell interesting stories. So we're going to talk a little bit this morning about some of that data that has been collected by you all, and some of the stories and information we can do with that data, and then hopefully inspire some of you to go out and collect some of this data so we can tell a more complete story. So just show of hands, who in the room has participated in any SARE measurement so far? So, far too few of you. I need everyone's hands up, I hope, by this time next year. Go ahead and take me to another slide, Lisa. You can go one more slide. So what data did we collect? Take me to the next slide. So we're collecting two types of data for those of you who remember the presentations from previous years. We're collecting data on commercial farm food loss and backyard food waste. We sort of distinguish that because on farms, that usually doesn't end up in the waste stream. In backyards, it does usually end up in the waste stream, although not always, but the majority of times. So 11 states and 30 different programs have provided us with non-commercial waste. You can see the leaders up there, we got Hawaii, Colorado, Oregon, a few other states providing a bit of that data, but we would love to see this, say, 45, 50 states. And then let's look at the commercial data we've collected. Next slide, Lisa, for a second. Okay, so commercial, we have 16 states, but just 24 programs. Washington and Oregon are really leading the pack there, but we can see little bits from a few of the others of you out there. So thank you. Let's go on to the next slide. Here's the crops that we've collected on commercial crops. You can see we've collected a ton of different crops out there, but not a ton of measurements in any of these crops. We'll talk about that in a second. Lisa, take me to the next slide. We're going to go through a lot of these slides pretty quickly this morning. Here's some more of the commercial crops. You can see a lot of 1s and 2s in there. That data we'll talk about in a second, but it's not helpful for us unless we get more of it. So we'll need some more of that data. Go ahead, one more slide. So this slide is the non-commercials. We are killing it with apples. We have collected so much apple data. So if we can actually go one more slide so you can see where everything else is. But apples is the big thing we've been collecting, but we're also getting some good, pear data and Asian pears and oranges. This is a little out of date. It's about a month and a half, maybe 2 months out of date at this point. So some of those numbers have come up significantly, but one more slide. So non-commercial, we're getting a real wide variety of non-commercial crops too. We're getting a lot of field crops. One more slide. Sorry. Yeah. So what were we able to learn? Go ahead and take me one more. So one of the cool pieces of data is we're beginning to understand why food is left on farms. This is one of the questions we've been asking you guys. Why was this available? And you can see there's this harvest completed for the season. So these are crops that farmers are done picking. We're getting a significant amount of produce coming off of those. We're also seeing there was no market for this, whether that crop didn't have a buyer or that crop was misshapen or just was not commercially marketable for those. And then, this is something we probably, due to current policies, are going to see increase a lot, which is this labor shortage. About a quarter of the produce that we're seeing, you guys are doing measurements on, is there just was no one to pick it. There was no labor. So this is helpful data, not just for us, but to share out to the farming community and policymakers and help drive the question of what can we do to reduce on-farm food loss. If we can understand the reasons for this food loss, then we can start to envision solutions for it. Yeah, go ahead.
What do you mean by weather? Is it because it was damaged because of weather, or can you explain that one?
So what we hope that we're getting, this is a good question because we're just asking you what's the source and whether it's the one that's coming in. What we think that we're getting this from is, frost, things like that are coming in and it just had to get out. So there is a portion of this survey, if you're filling it out, where you can put some notes in, and what we're seeing is for example, Upper Colorado submitted a measurement of some butternut squash that was frozen. So that takes the shelf life of butternut squash from, it was some sort of winter squash. I don't think butternut's actually what it was. Maybe you guys know. But that takes the shelf life from months to weeks. And so the farmer couldn't sell it. And so they came in and harvested. A lot of that sort of weather stuff, we're seeing stuff like that. That's why there's just unpredictable weather required that crop to come out of the ground way before the normal harvesting could get later out there. Go ahead.
Where would unexpected yield, like unexpectedly large yield go on this? Would that be included in harvest complete for the season, or?
Yeah, I think where we're probably getting most of that data is that the non-commercially marketable, or there was no market for it. Where we're seeing people with far more produce produced than they anticipated. That's usually where I'm guessing we're getting most of that. Any other questions on this before we move on? And I will say this is our preliminary data. That's what that first slide that had a lot of words on it, because we have shared this data set out as well with folks. This is, especially on commercial farms, this is still a really small sample. And we're looking for about 2,000 data points. This is maybe 400, 300 data points. And so what we really hope is that as we go through this year and collect a lot more data, this data will clean up a lot. And it'll be much more statistically viable. This is our short snapshot of what we think is happening. Let's go out and actually see what's actually happening now with this more data is our goal. So, I thought maybe there was another question over there. Okay, take me to the next slide. So this was also interesting data, and we hope as we get more data points to analyze this data across farm size and say, like, this is our cucumber loss on small scale farms, this is our cucumber loss on different size farms. But this, Lisa Johnson, some of you might remember her from the previous symposium. She is our grant manager on this project and also an advisor on it because she's sort of the leading expert on on-farm food loss in the US. And she's found this data super surprising. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about it recently, is that how this data stacks up to other data that's been gathered on larger scale farms. Because you can see most of our data is coming from under 5-acre farms. And the assumption is that the food loss would be less on those farms. But it really is very comparable to the data gathered on large scale farms, which has been an interesting early finding. Go ahead, Deb.
Is that a percentage-wise equivalent, or is it potentially just because of more numbers have been collected on small farms?
Well, so when I say the data, the percentage, the per acre yield. So all of this data, we've been converting it back to a per acre yield. We're saying, maybe you did a bed of tomatoes that was, our minimum sample size is 50 square feet, so maybe you did 50 square feet. We're saying if that was on a full acre, what would that loss be per acre? And those data numbers have compared very closely to, say, 500-acre farms, where other data has been collected to say, yeah, I'm making this up because I don't remember, but 50% of tomatoes are staying behind in the fields. On the small scale farms, that seems to be the case, and on large scale farms, that seems to be the case, which, again, this is, not the largest data set that we want to have, but if that trend holds, then it helps us think about where is actually the food loss occurring. Is it still occurring because we're also on the next slide, we'll show, I think, we're collecting data on where the sales outlets were for these produce, and how does that compare to food loss? So, sorry, it's not this next slide, but it's coming up, so we'll get there in a second.
How much do you think that yield per acre might be influenced too by like the restrictions on, because like it has to be one crop per row, right? So people who are planting companion crops, doing more permaculture style, or maybe like we're not harvesting the entire row. I see a lot is like we're just thinking like how much do you think that that's influencing the data of how much farm loss there is on small farms?
Shawn, repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question was is how much is, farming practices like companion cropping and not harvesting full rows affecting this data? I definitely think there is some effect that's happening there. What my hope is we get larger data sets that will be mellowed out. I think you can definitely, well, that's one of the things we're wondering, like, is that what's playing into here? And unfortunately, with the size of the data set at the moment, I don't think we can say that, but these are the trends we're seeing at the moment. Billy, did you have a question, or were you just stretching? Okay. You could take us to the next slide. So, we also asked how many times the fields have been harvested. We're still seeing gleaners in fields that have been harvested 5, 6, 10 times. These 10-time harvests, these are your small-scale CSA farmers. These are the guys who, are out there picking tomatoes every week, and yet there's, you guys are coming in and picking in those. I show this slide to say, like, look, we don't have to have, and what we're going to see later on in the data too, is we don't have to have unharvested fields for gleaning. The other thing, the other slide is we don't need many new gleaners I've talked to say, there's not large-scale farms in my area. Or I can't get on these, 1,000-acre farms. You don't need 1,000-acre farms for gleaning. That's one of the pieces I think this data is going to point to, is gleaning works really well on 5-acre farms. And I know that from having conversations with all of you who are gleaning on these small farms, that, a half dozen small farms can really support a gleaning organization. And so having that data to share back and say, like, not only anecdotally am I saying to you, yeah, no, you don't need to go out and find 500 acres of farmland, and 10 farms. You just need a few farms, but to be able to have this data to show, I think will be helpful for us moving forward as well. Next slide. So we're looking at farm practices as well. I share this slide because I think something we're missing in our story is that 50% or more of the produce that you guys are measuring on is organic production. We need to do a better job of talking about the quality of produce that's coming off of gleaning as well. And we hope with this data to be able to say, like, look, we're seeing far more organic production going into gleaning, all those kind of things. This is part of that story we can tell about gleaned produce. We're also collecting this data because hopefully when we get a larger data set, we can compare across different farm practices and different crop yields to say, what's the waste in organic, what's the waste in no-till, what's the waste in some of these other practices. And I will say that many of you are putting in data points, and there's multiple data points. It's not like this person just does organic or just does no-till or just does conventional agriculture. There's a ton of different ways in which people are putting that in, but we hope as the data set gets bigger to be able to compare some of that stuff. Next slide. So this was, compares back in, this is the slide I was talking about. CSA farmers market stands, that's the primary sales outlet for folks that we're gleaning and measuring on right now. And then if you compare that with the secondary one, it's a large portion of that's going there. The other interesting piece of this that, as I was talking to Lisa, she was like, look, I think it's really interesting that 30% of the farmers that you're working with don't have a secondary sales outlet. What can we do in farm policy to help them with that issue? Because that's tough. If you only have one customer and that customer goes away, of course there's going to be loss and waste. And so, this is another I wasn't setting out to say as we gathered this data, that there should be greater emphasis on helping farmers have secondary outlets, but that's sort of some of the ripple effects that could come out of collecting this kind of data. So, next slide. So we're going to jump through these slides pretty quickly, but I just want to show you, we're going to be looking at quality of produce. So let's go ahead and go to this slide. So again, really small samples. Most of these are 3 or 4 samples, but what I want you guys to be looking at is the green is A-grade quality produce. This is marketable percentage of the crop that was marketable in those fields, and these are averages across the sample size. And one of the things we wanted to be able to show in this study, and we thought we were going to show, is that most of the produce that we're getting in gleaned is not seconds. Most of the produce that's left behind in fields is not seconds. It's A-grade commercial quality produce. You know, broccoli is one of the few exceptions here. You know, our broccoli samples that we've been getting are mostly B-grade and processing grade broccoli. But, you know, jump through a couple other slides here. These are all commercial. You can see there's just a lot of green up here. Next slide too, one more of these, I think, or maybe 2 more of these. You know, green, green, green. So, what do we do with that data? How do we help that with farmers? Here's one of the potential stories that we can tell about this data, is this is our unrealized value of the produce left in those fields. We're using the USDA's commodity pricing for these and then anticipated acre yields for these numbers. But this is what we can go back to farmers and say, like look, it's probably not worth it to do a second pick of green beans. Very little value left in those fields. But, you know, there's broccoli, this is all B grade, and so we could talk about that piece, like, could we have broccoli processing? Is there a way in these communities where we're growing a lot of broccoli, should we be funding more processing or more B grade spots for those? You know, apples or pears. There's some of these crops that there is a tremendous amount of value still being left in the field, and you know, while we're gleaners, we'll never glean all the produce that's left in fields. That's just not a goal that we should have because it's impossible. We're not even get to 1% yet. You know, I just do not imagine that this gleaning movement's ever going to be 1,000 times bigger than it is at this moment. And so we need to sort of help farmers also realize, like, is there a way, is it worth going back in the fields? What's the monetary value that's being left behind? So that's one of the pieces we can share with this story. I broke it down. This is just A grade. You know, you see how broccoli went clear down there. And then go to the next slide. And then B grade. So, like, is there a need for processing in some of these communities? You know, like pears, there's a tremendous amount of B grade pears being left behind in our commercial studies right now. And again, this is small data sets for most of these crops. We really want to see larger data sets. And that's what we hope to be able to present this time. Next year is much larger data sets on this. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So, backyard fruit. A lot of you glean backyard fruit. The quality of those fruits goes down in a lot of the crops. Some of them it doesn't. You know, grapefruits, avocados, limes. Those are doing pretty well in backyards. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Then you can see a couple other crops, much larger sample sizes here. Some of these are actually now statistically relevant sample sizes, which is awesome. Go one more slide. These are crops we just got from Hawaii, so as we get good data from your state, and lots of data, we can look at statewide specific stuff. Go one more slide for me. And this is kind of cool because now we have apples. You know, we have a lot of apple samples, right? We can look at quality of apples across the state. Sorry for you folks in Colorado. Your A-grade quality is pretty low. Washington State, the A-grade quality is much higher. And so then we can look at, you know, Washington State actually has several programs that focus on fruit tree care. Is that fruit tree care investment paying off? You know, and so we can look at this data and say, oh, that could be, you know, as we get a few more data points and really dive in and analyze it, is it worth promoting more fruit tree care? Are we going to get a higher quality of fruit? And how does it even affect the neighboring organizations who maybe aren't doing fruit tree care? Because those of us who have spent a lot of time in the urban canopy know that it's kind of like a huge urban orchard. And what happens in one neighborhood does affect what happens in the other neighborhoods. So, you can go next. So, and then we said, what kind of story can we tell for the homeowners? So I have 3 different slides that are 3 different story points we can say to the homeowners. Using data from retail pricing, grocery store pricing, we said, what's the value of this tree to a homeowner? What's the value of the fruit? Apples are pretty low because we only valued A-grade fruit. We didn't value the B-grade or the C-grade fruit. We just said, what's the A-grade? But there's some, these Italian plums. Maybe I should plant an Italian plum tree. It's like $1,000 value right there.
Generally, it's around $4 to $6 per pound to buy plums.
Yeah.
They're usually imported from somewhere else. And in Spokane, almost everyone has plum trees because they don't have any pests in our area. So if we get, I didn't put them in the sample sizes, unfortunately, but this year we'll put them in and we get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds.
Yeah, and so to be able to now go to your homeowner and say like, ooh, this is a really cool plum tree you have. Maybe you should spend a little bit of money to care for it because it's going to give you $1,000 worth of plums every year. And that might be worth it to you. So, and then go ahead and go to the next slide. But what else can we tell with that? So here's some the trees that we only had Hawaii samples on. Bananas, pretty low value. Bananas are cheap. But star fruits, some of these other fruits, mangoes, there's some value there. So go ahead and go one more slide. And so then I started getting creative. I was like, what other stories can we tell for urban planners with this data? And we said, what if you just had to rely on that tree for all your daily calories? How many days worth of food does this tree in your backyard provide? And so we put some of these in. Avocados provide a ton of days worth of food. You'd probably be sick of avocados at day 100, but or just sick, yeah. But then I said, no one wants to eat avocados every meal, so let's look at it a little bit differently. One more slide. What's the day's worth of recommended servings of that crop? So, with breadfruit, it was a starch, but the rest of these are fruits and vegetable daily serving guides. So, your Italian plum provides almost 300 days worth of plum servings. Your limes, your oranges, all of these are providing a lot of servings of fruits and vegetables. And I don't have the slides up here, but I broke it down into how many servings of fruits and vegetables do each of these types of trees provide. And this, we think, will be useful data for you all when you're going to your urban planning and you're talking in your cities about the value of fruit trees within your neighborhoods. They're providing a tremendous, or could be providing a tremendous amount of fruit and food to people. And we know that most of it's ending up on the ground. And so what we can do about that? How can we change that? And how can we help cities think about their self-sufficiency and their food sovereignty and having data on the average productions of these trees, we think is helpful. So that's why we're trying to get you all to collect this kind of data. Go ahead, next slide. So what's next? One more slide. So we looked at how do we get these data to statistically significant sample sizes. And there's a whole complex formula for this. It has to do a lot with the variance in the samples you're giving us and all of that. But what we know is that we need at least 50 samples for this to be very useful data to us. And really we want about 90 to 150 samples. So we're a long ways off from that on most crops. We're there in apples. We actually have, we don't probably need that much more apple data, although we are still collecting apple data. So if you're in an apple place, don't worry, you can still submit that data. But the rest of this, we need more. So we need a lot more data. Go ahead. So how can you help? So if you haven't participated in the SARE project, we really need your help in this process. We have one more year to collect this data. We have one more year to spend down about $460,000 in funding, which requires all of you to get out there and collect some data. It's not a complex process, I promise. It can fit really well into your gleaning process. So you need the following things. You need a measuring tape. If you're doing field measurements, that needs to be 25 feet long. You need a scale, and ideally you're going to bring a hard copy of the data set with you. So,
Question from the chat.
Yep.
Is SARE open to Canadians?
It's not. This is USDA funding, so it's only open to US-based programs. So the question was SARE open to Canadians? Sorry, I should have repeated it. Okay, so then the second step is determining your sample size. This is going to vary by the type of glean you're conducting. So there's 4 different types of gleans in this project. We're going to talk through each of those because each has a different sample size requirement. Go ahead, Lisa, take me one more slide. So on commercial farms, our desired sample size, this is the industry standard, is 3 25-foot long rows. We know that does not work for all of you. So our minimum sample size is 50 square feet. So that can be a 10-foot row that's 5 feet wide, or a 20-foot row that's 2.5 feet wide. Could be 2 little plots, but 50 square feet is our minimum sample size in the commercial production. So as a reminder, for those of you who maybe have not heard me speak about this before, commercial is anything that has been harvested before, because we're capturing after harvest loss. So the field has to have been harvested before, and they have to sell the produce. So this can't be a community garden or a food bank garden. Those would go in non-commercial. Also, if you're on a commercial farm and they've never harvested it, it's just like, you know what, look, we planted this broccoli and now we have so much broccoli, we're never going to harvest this field. You also can enter that data, but we're putting it in non-commercial because we're analyzing it differently. We don't want to confuse the data set. Go ahead, Karen.
I'm curious about that last piece and how, like, I understand that you're analyzing differently, but if are you putting it into the backyard?
We're not. We're pulling it out. We're going to pull, so when you fill out the non-commercial farm, there's sort of, why was this grown? And you put in it's a commercial farm, it wasn't harvestable. So then we were pulling all of that out, and it will be, depending on if we get enough, there may be a data set in there. I don't know yet.
So a research field of tens of thousands of pounds of cabbage that is definitely not in the backyard, it's not going into the waste stream, that distinction earlier, because you
Yeah.
and it's not commercial, it's never intended to be sold. It has its own bucket that.
It has its own bucket that we may get enough data to analyze. We don't know, but we're still paying out for it. That still all works. Go ahead.
I'm really curious, and my question is difficult to phrase, so I apologize. But why does the USDA care about how much extra food commercial growers are donating to breeding organizations to sell the food, when that can already be tracked through the sales tax and things like that? Why is this data important to them?
So the question, if I sum it up right, and this will be a good practice to see if I got it, is why does USDA care about this data if they can already get it from other sources? So they care about the data because of EPA's and others' goals to cut food waste by 50%, but they actually can't get this data from other sources. That's probably the big piece, is that nobody has good data on this. So percentage of food loss data, the best standard that we have right now was this self-reporting study that USDA did in, I believe, the late 90s, where what they did is they asked farmers to guess how much food was left in their fields after their harvest. And that's been the standard that we've been using for 30 years. So Lisa Johnson started to do some studies quite a while ago too, I'm gonna guess 15 plus years ago, that shows that that count is a vast undercount. And our data is showing that same thing, and there's been small handfuls of studies done since then. But this will be, at the moment, the largest study done on this, by thousands of data points. The closest ones are under 100 data points. And there have been specific crops, there's not been across these crops, but we're talking like 10 data points, 20 data points, probably max. So this is data that doesn't exist out there.
I'm just, again, trying to understand what they'll use it for.
Yeah, so the follow-up was like, what will they use it for? I hope they'll use it to drive farm policy, but it might be a big ask.
In which way though, right? Because I can decide. So I'm a conspiracy theorist in the room. And I just want to understand, you know, how to make sure this continues. Because the data could be viewed either way, depending on who's in charge and what their goals are.
Yeah, the data could be used anyway, and that's very true. I would say my hope is that we grow less food, but I know that's a very unpopular comment, and I saw heads pop up. But I mean, the data's out there. We're growing enough food for 4,000 calories a day for every human on Earth. That's a lot of excess food that we shouldn't be cutting down forests to grow. You know, we're destroying the Earth to grow food we'll never eat. So that's Shawn's personal opinion. I have no idea what USDA would do, and they probably wouldn't sanction said comment.
So when SARE first came out and you had asked us to participate in it, when I was reading, they do want to cut back the food waste, but how does a farmer determine, because we're on large farms where I'm at, how do they determine that they're going to get all a product, all marketable product versus, you know, they get in tomato rot due to weather, all of that stuff. How will that work for them?
So the question is how will farmers determine what their quality will be? Is that the question?
Well, the question is, if the USDA comes in and says, hey, you need to grow less food because there's so much food waste, how does the farmer then at that point determine, well, I'm only going to plant 15 pounds of seed on this, and then their crop comes up and there's a huge waste off.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone is advocating for USDA to come in and say what you can or cannot grow, or that you should grow less. My hope is that this data is used to drive comprehensive policy. So there's several pieces of this, right? We can talk about whole crop purchasing, so that farmers are actually taking everything that's coming out of their field and they're getting purchased for it. We could talk about the need for, you know, there used to be in this country small processors everywhere. You know, now we have very little food processing that happens in the US, and it happens in huge concentrated parts of the US. And so, you know, is there a need for better investment in farm processing so that these B-grade produce has somewhere to go? You know, there's no simple solution to this. An example solution would be, you know, I live in Costa Rica. Costa Rica implemented a policy years ago to reforest their country where they paid farmers to reforest the edges of their fields. So they're producing less food, it's led to massive reforestation. There could be, there's a whole host of policies, but until we really understand the problem, we can't solve it. If we think the farm food loss is 15% of grown produce, and it's really 50, like a 15% solution won't solve the 50% problem. And if we think it's mostly compost grade, but actually it's mostly A grade, then like the solutions won't solve. Until we really understand the problem, the solutions can't solve it. So.
Lisa Johnson put something in the chat.
Yeah.
She said USDA did not ask for this data. AGO applied for a grant to collect this data, and SARE granted the funds to do it.
Yeah, so that's a good distinction. Lisa said, USDA didn't ask for this data. We applied for the grant to collect the data and to share that data, so.
I have a quick question. Do you think that a lot of, it's back to that commercial style, like we're not going to consider it commercial if it hasn't been harvested idea? With the way diesel prices are right now, I feel like there's going to be a lot of crops planted, and then maybe if diesel prices do not fall by the time harvest comes, we're going to see more and more of those commercial farmers just leaving it to sit because it's not financially worth it for them to go get. So that might be this year something that you look at, is that data set grows. Are you looking at that?
Yeah, the question was, as diesel prices continue to rise, and if they continue to stay high, we may see a lot of unharvested crops because they just can't afford to harvest them. I would say that we're not set, this is, our food system is very broken, and like, we're not setting out to solve all of those problems. I think what we're just trying to do is better collect and understand one piece of the problem. And you're right, we ran into this with the census too. Like, these were tricky years to collect this data, but there's always something going on in the world. And so there's no, I'm forgetting the scientific term, it's really bothering me here now. But there's no sample that's pure to say this is our base. Control, thank you. Yeah, there's no control here. There's always something going on. Come to you in a second, Kathy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so if there's an alternative if the row hasn't been previously harvested, but I'm curious if there's an alternative if we're not harvesting 100%, because the vast majority of my small farms that I work with are doing CSAs, and they almost never want us to take 100%. They want us to leave the smallest ones to grow more, or leave a section of the row for them. So is there any way to contribute to this data when we're not harvesting 100% of the row?
Yeah, so the question is if you're not harvesting 100% of the crop, a lot of times this is called maintenance cleaning. Is there a way to contribute to this data set? We really tried to find a way to use that data, but there was no solution we could come up with that wasn't just so burdensome. And so unfortunately, there's just not a way to measure that at this moment.
You're at 20 minutes left.
Okay. Go ahead, Deb.
Couldn't a way to measure something like that be for example, for something like tomatoes? If the farmer calls you in and you're harvesting 2 400-foot beds of tomatoes, but you only get to a bed and a half of them.
So that's fine. Sorry.
Yeah, could that be a way that makes sense to collect that data?
Yeah, so what Deb asked is if a farmer offers you 200-foot beds and you only get to half of it, can that data go in? That data can go in. What can't go in is if the farmer comes in and says, you can only pick all the tomatoes that are, bigger than a tennis ball, leave everything smaller, because what we need to understand is the whole yield of that right now. We're just getting the A grade out of there, right? And so it doesn't give us good data for that, unfortunately. But you can't, if you don't do the whole, as long as you get the minimum sample size, you can do that. I'm gonna answer 2 more questions, then I'm gonna move through these so that I at least explain to y'all what to do.
I just wanted to comment that as we're writing the report, important newsworthy trends like why is there a labor shortage due to immigration policies, why is there a difficulty transporting due to the closures of local food processing due to diesel, we will take that into account, and so there's context going to be provided as well as what's happening in the news. See that in the Gleaning report, we do make mention of, the kind of surrounding attributes of what's happening today and how should that be influencing the data. So I just wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, so for those of you on Zoom, if you didn't catch that, Kathy just said that, when this report is published, what's going on in the world is going to be listed in that report. So we'll definitely share that data, or that background out there as well, in the context. Okay, so with commercial farms, I don't even remember where I was. There's
Sample size.
basically, so you've got this sample size. We just need one crop. We've had some people put in like, we got cucumbers, tomatoes, and peppers, 50 square feet. That data is useless to me, because I don't know how much of it was cucumbers, I don't know how much of it was peppers, I don't know any of that. So we're looking for one crop type here in your sample size. So you're gonna measure it out, you're gonna accurately measure the row length, and the other place that people get lost in here is you need to measure the row width. So the row width requires you to go from middle of walkway to middle of walkway, or edge of walkway to edge of walkway. But we need walkways, because farms have walkways. And if I use this data to understand an acre's worth of loss, and you only give me beds, it's really gonna skew the data. So I need walkways. Please, please, please give me walkway measurements. Field must be previously harvested, if not, it goes to non-commercial. There's a lot of data in this spreadsheet. If some of you look at it, I have started to tell people this. There is nice to have data and there's necessary data. I need necessary data. I'll give you one second. I need necessary data. I need to know square footage, and I need to know crop type. That's it. That's the necessary data. The rest of it is nice to have. It helps us tell really complex stories. Farm type, where this produce was going, how big the farm is, farm practices, all of that, nice to have data. Necessary data is crops and square footage in this. There's a couple other points in the other data that's necessary, and I'll point those out, but yes, go ahead.
Maybe I will add another variable to the equation, but thinking internationally and thinking in how much food in Mexico is like exported to the US, and a lot of this food stays in the border or in the fields too. Because there are agreements with international companies, Del Cabo is an example, that it's dedicated, and the food, the farmers can sell it to another customer. They need to sell it just to the company, and sometimes it's, well, I've seen piles of food that the food had a destination, talking about cherry tomatoes and grapes and a lot of asparagus, a lot of food. But my question is, have you thinking, or there is some study, international or something, that is accounting this or taking in or considering this food that it hasn't been here in the US and stays in the border or in the country?
Yeah, so the question was, and the comment was, the complex international relationships of where food comes from, and how so much of that food, in the Baja, or all around the world really, is grown and must be sold just to the company who's contracted you to sell it. And the tremendous amount of waste that sometimes happens either at the border or on these farms when that doesn't have a home for it. I mentioned before that this would be the largest study that has been done historically, but there also is a simultaneous study going on right now that will be equally as large, and that's the study that World Wildlife Fund's doing, and they are doing international data collection. They're collecting data all over the world on on-farm food loss right now, and maybe one day we'll be able to merge this data with their data. There's some complications in how we're collecting the data compared to them, but I would say that what we hope is that our data set can be used with other data sets. That's why we're using a similar collection method as these other data sets. Because food isn't just a national problem. It's grown all over the world. And so, you can't just solve food waste in California and solve food waste. We have to solve it everywhere. So, okay, so let's talk about these other sample that we're doing. So the second thing we're doing is commercial fruit tree orchards. Our desired sample size here is 3 trees, and that's also our minimum sample size. We ask you to try to harvest the whole tree. Ideally, these trees aren't like right next to each other if you're in a big orchard. There's one here, one there, one there. Just do your best to make it as random of a sample as possible. If you can't sample the whole tree, sometimes these trees are big, or I know a lot of gleaners that go in commercial orchards. In the commercial orchard, it says you can do this, but no ladders. What we ask is that you let us know. This is the other critical piece of data on fruit trees: number of trees harvested and percentage of trees harvested. So 4 critical data points in fruit trees. If you don't harvest the whole tree, make sure you harvest everything within the area of the tree. So don't just pick all the good oranges off and give me that sample. Pick all the oranges. If it's just on a quarter of the tree, or if it's just on the bottom 10% of the tree, that's fine, but I need all the fruit that came off of that, and I need to know what percentage it is. And then ask the farmer for total number of acres in production and what their planting yield or their planting density is. So how many trees are they planting per acre? Because that's how we're gonna figure out what the per acre loss is. Go ahead, Sarah.
This is more for non-fruit trees, but let's say it's a farmer who has 40 acres and they're farming 20 of them that year. Do you want both numbers? Do you just want 20?
Those would both fall in the same sample size area, but yeah, what's in production?
Okay, like just for the year.
Production, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know, that's one. Keep going. Okay, so non-commercial row crops, the desired sample size is the same. The minimum sample size is the same, 50 square feet. There's really not much difference in non-commercial as commercial. This is just anything that's not been harvested before or wasn't going to sale. This can be as small as community gardens. This can be as big as a 200-acre seed farm or a test plot. Backyard trees. We have a little bit different minimal sample size here. So if the the sample size is under 40 pounds, then the tree needs to be 25 inches in circumference. So we're measuring all the way around the tree at waist height, guys. Waist height. If the tree splits before waist height, we're measuring both of those branches. So circumference, that's helpful. This is nice to have data, not necessary data, but nice to have data. And you need to harvest at least 75% of the tree. So what we don't want is you to say, I did 10% of the tree, my sample size is 20 pounds, the tree was this big. That's not helpful data to us. So we need either big trees with little fruit, that's fine. We get samples that are like 20 pounds of big trees, that's totally okay. But we don't want, just you go out for like 10 minutes and then be done.
If I have a bunch of data from last year that I could use, to accurately say, harvest that I did last year, would you want those data points as well?
Sure. Yeah, take them. Great, yeah, so we talked about how to measure the circumference. There's lots of videos on this. If you need a video to watch on it, we have so many. Go ahead. So then once you're done, you did all this. The other key piece is you need to sort the produce. Water somewhere. We're sorting the produce into 3 categories, and we're rating this. Marketable. This is stuff you would find at the grocery store. So anything you would find in the grocery store goes in the marketable category. If you wouldn't find it in the grocery store, it goes in the B grade or the edible. This is stuff you would give to someone else to eat. I don't want stuff that you would eat yourself. I want stuff you would give to someone else because I know this group and you're like, oh, yeah, this is sort of damaged on this side, but this side's probably awesome. No, don't give me that. You just eat around the worms, it's fine. I don't want that in this category either, guys. If you wouldn't give it to someone else to eat, it goes in the compost C grade category, okay? Simple enough? Awesome. And then you weigh those. I want to know how much A, I want to know how much B, and I want to know how much C grade. So, yeah, lots of links to see these different forms. Go ahead, next slide. So here's our leaders. These are the folks who are just providing so much data out there, and this, you know, and that have earned a lot of money doing so. So food finders, Alameda Backyard Gleaners. These organizations are doing and collecting a bunch of data. You'll see some down here like Urban Gleaners. That's because that's all farm data.
Curious about the slide. How much money is that? 60,000?
Oh, no, I think everyone on here, those are hundreds. So we are not spending down this grant at the rate we need to be spending down this grant. I wish that right now people had earned $60,000 because they could. That's what I want to be spending out to people. So how it works is backyard data is worth $100. Any non-commercial data is $100 per data point. Commercial data is $200 per data point.
And if you're a first time.
Oh, and if it's your first time entering commercial data, $750 is the incentive for your first commercial data point. If you haven't given me a commercial data point, $750 to get that first one. Next slide. So I asked Amy to talk a little bit about being on the leaderboard, but just about her experience doing this. How hard was this, Amy? Should we come to you?
So honestly, it wasn't hard. We were already doing a lot of the basic measurements of weight of what we were picking, gleaning from each tree, how many trees, that was kind of going into just our records. So now just weighing the stuff that would go in compost and measuring the trunks. It's been easy for us. And so myself and then my co-lead for our bleeding program, we had to wait until my schedule was available so we could do like the video the first time and like make the plan of like, okay, anything that's secret we put into red trays that we're picking and weighing that because we normally had ever weighed it. And then I made us a little quick Google form that I could fill out like as we were doing it for all of his extra data points because otherwise I forget. My co-lead, she's great with keeping numbers in her head, I'm not so much.
How much extra time is this for you? A harvest?
A harvest? I don't know, 15 minutes. What's the, the invoice and stuff and fill out the extra form. It doesn't take as much extra time.
Okay, let's talk tools. What kind of measuring tape? Is it the kind that snaps back to you, makes you cut your fingers? Is it like a?
No, I just got the little, like from Michael's, the like sewing.
Sewing.
So we're just doing, we usually do trees. So I bought like 2 of those from Michael's, so we keep it in like our organization van and then my probably is 2. We have that. And we have our crates and our scale that we already had. And so yeah, that was the only extra thing I had to buy is 2 measuring tapes.
Awesome. So they asked what tool she used. So, Amy's just doing backyard fruit trees, so she just used a little cloth measuring tape from Michael's. It's the only tool she had to buy for this. Has anyone else done this and can tell about their experience?
I'm a bad example.
Yeah, who's going to tell us about how you collected it but didn't enter it?
Yeah, I'm a very bad example. I collected a lot, but I didn't enter it because there was so much going on. First year tractor, right, everybody? I was trying my best. But for fruit trees, particularly like backyards, non-commercial, that was what I did. So again, I was a bad example. Just collected a lot of data, didn't actually enter a lot of it. My main, like 60% of my gleaning is backyard fruit trees, so non-commercial fruit trees. And one of the easy things about this is that I actually don't have to do, like it's almost easier because I'm just picking everything, right? I'm just grabbing all the fruit that's in my range and putting it and then sorting it. And so it doesn't take, in fact, I think it takes less time than if I'm like selecting A grade from the tree, like grabbing it and putting it over to the side. So that was actually something I noticed and I'm excited to actually utilize in this next section of doing it.
Thank you.
But also, in terms of row cropping, a lot of farmers that I work with are small farmers, and when we're doing the row cropping specifically, I feel like I have a lot of data for like post-harvest fruit from last year as well. So those like farmers were really interested in this data. When I asked them about can I collect this data, is that helpful? They were like, we want to know the results of this. Like, is this helpful for us to figure out how we're going to do planting and everything else next year? So I was thinking in terms of, oh, this is also an opportunity for a relationship with my farmers that I'm working with. So that's what I was thinking about.
Is there anyone here who's done like a lot of row cropping efforts?
Yeah, I was looking at Connor's back. Connor's done a lot. Yeah. Try to think of all sides.
If you want to spin down, you can pay more.
Yeah, good. But I also want enough data points to get my significant. Just
1 year left though.
Yeah.
All of this information, if you're thinking, how am I going to find all these forms? Where do I get more training? Where do I get more information? Go to our website under SARE, and all of that is listed there. If you have additional questions, I can answer them. But get measuring. We have organizations $5,000, $6,000 that they've earned last year, and we'd like to double that for your organization.
And we've had a lot of organizations the last couple of months who are getting about $2,000 a month. So, you know, there you can earn $4,000 or $5,000 a month doing this.
You need to keep the volume down.
Yeah, sorry, volume down for Zoom. If you do commercial gleaning and I haven't called you, I'm probably going to be calling you. I've been calling people. So let's chat about this. I'm available to chat about it here. I'm available to chat about it on the phone. Want to find a way to make this work for you all. We want to find a way that this is valuable for you and valuable for us. So let's chat through that. Yeah.
And our Canadians want to know, although they can't get paid, is the data still, can they still submit the data?
Sure, yeah, I would love the data from Canadians, but I can't pay them. And all this data was obviously going to be made available to you all. You know, you can all have access to the raw data if you want. Just reach out to me, I'm happy to share that with you. And then I will say that, you know, no farmers are identified in any of this data. You know, all we're asking for is zip codes. So there's no way to trace this back to any farmers. That was a really important piece of this for us.
And you're on time.
So thank you guys so much. Come find me if you want to chat.